Have you ever wondered how a simple gesture can change two lives forever? This is the story of a coat that warmed much more than a body trembling with cold. To understand how a moment of kindness transformed into one of the most viral stories on the internet, we need to go back to a freezing night in December in Oakland, California. The cutting wind blew through the streets like ice blades, carrying with it the metallic smell of approaching winter. It was Tuesday, December 18th, and the temperature had plummeted to just 2 degrees above zero. One of those nights when even the air seemed to crystallize with each breath. Steph Curry adjusted his coat collar as he left the Oakland Community Center, where he had just participated in the annual charity event Hope in Winter. For 3 hours he had signed autographs, taken photos, and talked with children from needy families, feeling that warmth in his chest that always came when he could give back to the community that had welcomed him. "It was an incredible night, Steph," said Ryan Johnson, the event coordinator, as they walked toward the parking lot. "We raised more than $200,000 for families in need." It was possible to perceive that this amount represented much more than numbers. It meant food baskets, warm blankets, and hope for hundreds of people who would face that harsh winter. Steph smiled, feeling grateful for being able to make a difference, even if small, in other people's lives. The parking lot was almost empty, illuminated only by a few light posts that created yellowish circles on the frozen asphalt. Steph said goodbye to Ryan and walked toward his car, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silence of the night. That's when he saw her. Huddled against a brick wall, just a few meters from the community center exit, a fragile figure tried to protect herself from the freezing wind. It was an elderly woman, with graying hair escaping from a worn hat, wearing layers of clothes that clearly weren't sufficient for that brutal temperature. What most impresses about moments like these is how they test us when no one is watching. Steph stopped immediately, feeling something tighten inside his chest. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. The recognition of a shared humanity, of a vulnerability that we all carry, hidden only by more favorable circumstances. The woman trembled visibly, her hands curled up, trying to generate some warmth through friction. She kept her eyes down, as if trying to become invisible to the world that passed by her without seeing. There was something in her posture that spoke of dignity, preserved amid adversity, a silent strength that only those who have gone through great trials can maintain. Steph looked around. The streets were deserted. The wind howled between the buildings like a lament, and the temperature continued plummeting. How is it possible for someone to survive such a night unprotected? Without hesitation, Steph approached calmly, removing his own coat, an expensive and warm cashmere that he had received as a gift. The fabric still carried the warmth of his body when he knelt beside the woman. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a gentleness that warmed more than any clothing. "The night is very cold. Please, accept this." The woman slowly raised her eyes, and Steph saw something that touched him deeply. There was no desperation in those eyes, but a dignity that remained firm even in the most difficult circumstances. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, two human beings connected by a moment of pure compassion. "I cannot accept," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the cold. "It's too expensive, too good for me." "Nothing is too good for someone who needs warmth," Steph replied, gently placing the coat over her shoulders. "Please, you would be doing me a favor by accepting." It was impossible not to feel that this moment carried something special. The woman wrapped herself in the coat, as if she were being embraced by a kindness she hadn't experienced for a long time. Her tears mixed with the vapor of her breath in the frozen air. "What is your name?" Steph asked, sitting beside her on the cold sidewalk, as if they had all the time in the world. "Margaret," she replied, her voice breaking slightly. "Margaret Sullivan." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Margaret. I'm Steph." She nodded, clearly recognizing him, but without making a big deal about his fame. There was something refreshing about that simplicity, that human connection stripped of any pretension. "Small gestures change great lives," Steph said, a phrase his grandmother used to repeat, and that always guided him in moments like that. They talked for a few minutes about trivial things, the cold, the time of year, the beauty of the Christmas lights that shone in the distance. Steph noticed that Margaret spoke with careful diction, choosing words with precision, like someone accustomed to communicating clearly and politely. "Do you have a safe place to spend the night?" Steph asked, genuine concern showing in his voice. Margaret hesitated before answering. I manage. I always have." Steph felt his heart heavy, knowing that managing meant facing that freezing night without adequate shelter. He discreetly placed some bills in the coat pocket before standing up. "Margaret, if you need anything, anything at all, this is my card," he said, handing her a simple card with just his name and number. "Don't hesitate to call." "Thank you," she whispered, her hands trembling not just from the cold, but from emotion. "May God bless you, young man." Steph walked back to his car with a heavy heart, looking back several times to make sure Margaret was okay. He didn't know at that moment that he had just met someone who would change his life in a way he would never imagine. Small gestures change great lives, and that night, a warm coat was about to warm much more than a fragile body. It was about to warm a story that would touch millions of hearts around the world. What Steph didn't know was that Margaret Sullivan carried with her a secret that, when revealed, would transform that simple gesture into one of the most powerful lessons about gratitude and recognition the world had ever seen. Have you ever wondered who was the first person to believe in you when you didn't even believe in yourself? Sometimes, the most important heroes of our lives are those we meet when we're too small to understand the magnitude of the gift they're giving us. To comprehend the magnitude of what was about to happen, we need to go back in time and meet 8-year-old Steph Curry. It was September 1996, and little Steph walked nervously through the corridors of Davidson Elementary School for the first time. His small feet barely made noise on the shiny linoleum, but his heart beat loud enough to echo in his own ears. He was different from the other children, smaller, shyer, and carried on his shoulders the weight of being Del Curry's son, a professional NBA player. What bothers a child most is not being ignored, but being constantly compared to expectations that seem impossible to achieve. The other boys already expected Steph to be a natural basketball prodigy, while he could barely hit the basket in physical education classes. "Are you really Del Curry's son?" classmates would ask, with that unconscious cruelty that only children can have, "because you don't play anything like him." It was possible to perceive that each comment was like a small scar on the self-esteem of a child who just wanted to be accepted for who he was, not for who he should be. Steph came home every day feeling smaller than he already was physically. It was in the third week of school that everything changed forever. Mrs. Margaret Sullivan had just taken over the third-grade class after the sudden retirement of the previous teacher. At 52 years old, with brown hair tied in an elegant bun and eyes that seemed to see straight into her students' souls, she had a presence that commanded respect without needing to raise her voice. Margaret noticed Steph immediately, not because he was the son of a local celebrity, but because she recognized in him something she had seen in many children throughout her 25 years of teaching. a brilliant potential hidden behind shaken confidence. "Steph," she said after class, when all the other children had already left, "can you stay for a minute?" The boy felt his stomach freeze, certain he was in trouble. But when he approached the teacher's desk, Margaret smiled in a way that melted all his defenses. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" she asked, crouching down to be at eye level with him. Steph shook his head, unable to speak. "I see an intelligent, kind, and special boy. And you know what? It doesn't matter if you play basketball like your father or not. What matters is that you be the best Steph you can be. How is it possible that simple words have the power to change an entire life?" In that moment, something lit up inside Steph's chest. A small flame, but one that would grow to become the fire that would take him to the top of the world. Margaret didn't stop there. Throughout that entire school year, she invested in Steph in ways that went far beyond the school curriculum. When he had difficulties with math, she stayed after class to explain again. When the other boys mocked his height, she made him the leader of group projects, showing that leadership has nothing to do with physical size. "Small gestures change great lives," she used to say to the whole class, but Steph knew those words were especially directed at him. It was Margaret who first noticed that Steph had exceptional coordination, not necessarily for basketball, but for precise and calculated movements. "You have something special," she would say. "You may not see it now, but one day the whole world will recognize your talent." In December of that year, Steph went through one of the most difficult moments of his childhood. During a basketball game at school, he missed every shot he attempted, and the other children laughed so much that he left the court crying. He came home convinced he would never be good at anything. The next day, Margaret called him again after class. "I heard you had a difficult day yesterday," she said, sitting beside him. Steph just nodded, looking at the floor. "Do you know what's the difference between people who give up and people who achieve their dreams?" Margaret asked. "What?" "People who achieve their dreams know that failures are just opportunities, disguised as learning something new." She opened a drawer in her desk and took out a small notebook with a blue cover. "This is for you. I want you to write 3 things every day. 1 thing you did well, 1 thing you can improve, and 1 dream you have for the future." It was impossible not to feel that this notebook represented much more than paper and ink. It was an invitation for Steph to start believing in himself in a way he had never experienced. During the following months, Margaret became much more than a teacher to Steph. She was a mentor, a confidant, and the first adult outside his family who really saw something in him beyond his apparent limitations. "You have a heart the size of the world," she would say. And big hearts always find a way to touch other hearts. When the school year ended, Steph was transformed. Not only had his grades improved dramatically, but his confidence had grown in a way that surprised even his parents. He still wasn't the best basketball player in school, but he had discovered something more important. He was special, exactly as he was. On the last day of class, Margaret gave Steph a sealed letter. "Open it only when you feel lost or when you achieve something really important," she said. "And always remember, small gestures change great lives." Steph kept that letter like a treasure, carrying it with him through all the following years, through victories and defeats, through moments of glory and moments of doubt. Now, 27 years later, as he drove home that freezing December night, Steph found himself thinking about Margaret Sullivan for the first time in months. Maybe it was the charity event that had awakened memories of generosity. Maybe it was the fact that the next day he would visit his old school to make a donation. Or maybe it was something bigger. An intuition that the universe was preparing something special. Small gestures change great lives. And that night, Steph didn't know he was about to discover that one of the most important people in his life desperately needed a small gesture in return. There exists a moment in life when the past and present meet in such an impossible way that it seems to have been orchestrated by forces greater than ourselves. A second where everything we thought we knew about coincidence and destiny transforms into an absolute certainty that some connections transcend any logical explanation. It was Thursday morning, 2 days after the encounter on the frozen street, when Steph arrived at Davidson Elementary School. The winter sun shone weakly through the clouds, creating soft shadows in the courtyard where he had spent some of the most formative years of his life. Amanda Foster, the current principal of the school, received him with a warm smile at the main entrance. "Steph, it's an honor to have you here. The children are anxious to meet you, and your donation will make a tremendous difference in our renovations." As they walked through the familiar corridors, Steph felt a deep nostalgia taking hold of his chest. The walls still had that characteristic smell of chalk and cleaner, mixed with the aroma of school lunches that awakened memories of a simpler time. "This was my third-grade classroom," Steph said, stopping in front of a door painted light blue. His hands trembled slightly when he touched the doorknob. "Ah, you were a student of the legendary Margaret Sullivan," Amanda said, smiling fondly. "She was one of the best teachers this school ever had. 28 years dedicated to transforming lives." Steph's heart warmed at hearing the name. "How is she? Does she still live in the area?" Amanda's expression changed instantly. Her smile disappeared, replaced by a deep sadness that made Steph feel a chill in his stomach. "Steph, you don't know, do you?" "Know what?" he asked, a feeling of apprehension growing inside his chest. Amanda took a deep breath, clearly struggling to find the right words. "Margaret lost everything about 2 years ago. Her husband, Robert Kim, had advanced Alzheimer's. She spent all her savings, sold the house, lost her retirement taking care of him." It was possible to perceive that Amanda was reliving a pain she had witnessed up close. When Robert passed away last year, Margaret was left completely without resources. We tried to help, but she was always very proud. She refused help, said she didn't want to be a burden to anyone. Steph felt the world begin to spin slowly around him. Where is she now?" "Nobody knows exactly. A few months ago, someone said they saw a woman who looked like her on downtown streets, but Margaret simply disappeared." How is it possible that the universe can be so cruel and so kind at the same time? Steph felt his legs become weak when an image began to form in his mind, an image that made his heart stop completely. Graying hair, dignified eyes, a careful voice that chose words with precision. "Amanda," Steph whispered, his voice almost inaudible. "Do you have a photo of Margaret? A recent photo?" "Of course," Amanda said, walking to her desk and taking an album. "This was taken at her retirement party, 3 years ago." Steph looked at the photograph and felt the world collapse around him. It was her, the woman to whom he had given the coat, the woman who trembled with cold on the street, the woman who had thanked his kindness with tears in her eyes. It was Margaret Sullivan, his teacher, his mentor, the first person who had believed in him when he didn't even believe in himself. "My God," Steph whispered, leaning on the desk to avoid falling. "My God, it was her." "What do you mean?" Amanda asked, alarmed by his reaction. "I found her," Steph said, tears beginning to run down his face. "The night before last. She was on the streets, cold, and I didn't recognize her." What followed was one of the most impossible moments in human history. Steph, the man who had faced the greatest pressures of the basketball world, completely broke down. He cried like he hadn't cried since childhood, feeling the devastating weight of having found his greatest heroine in a situation of absolute vulnerability without even recognizing her. "I only gave her a coat," he sobbed. "A simple coat. When she saved my entire life." Amanda hugged Steph while he processed the magnitude of that moment. It was impossible not to feel that destiny had orchestrated that encounter in a way that transcended any coincidence. "Steph," Amanda said softly, "where did you see her? Was she still there?" "Near the community center. But that was 2 days ago. She could be anywhere now." It was at this moment that Steph made a decision that would change everything. He picked up the phone and did something he rarely did, used his fame for something deeply personal. "James," he said to his assistant, "cancel everything today. Everything. And call all the local TV stations. I'm going to make a public appeal." "Sir? A public appeal for what?" "To find the most important woman in my life." 2 hours later, Steph Curry was in front of cameras from all the major Oakland broadcasters, with eyes still red from crying, holding Margaret Sullivan's photo. "My name is Steph Curry," he began, his voice breaking, with emotion, "and I need your help to find someone very special." What Steph said in the next 5 minutes touched the hearts of millions of people around the world. He told Margaret's story about how she had transformed his life when he was just an insecure child. He told about the encounter on the street, about how he had given her a coat without recognizing her, and he pleaded for anyone who had seen her to get in touch. "This woman taught me that small gestures change great lives," Steffi said, looking directly at the cameras. "Now it's my turn to make a big gesture for her." It was impossible not to feel that this appeal carried an urgency that transcended fame or celebrity status. It was the desperate cry of a grateful heart that needed to repay a debt of love. The video went viral instantly. In 2 hours, it had been shared more than 1 million times. In 6 hours, it was being broadcast on all major news channels in the United States. In 12 hours, people from around the world were looking for Margaret Sullivan. "Margaret Sullivan, if you're watching," Steph said, ending the appeal with tears flowing freely. "I never forgot that blue notebook. I never forgot the letter you gave me. And I will never, ever forget that you taught me to believe in myself. Please, let me give back everything you did for me." Small gestures change great lives. And that day, a desperate appeal on television was about to prove that true gratitude has the power to move mountains and reunite hearts that destiny had separated by circumstances too cruel to bear. What happened in the next hours would change not only Margaret Sullivan's life, but redefined forever the concept of recognition and human gratitude. Have you ever witnessed the moment when human kindness transforms into an unstoppable force? When millions of hearts unite for a cause that transcends borders, languages, and differences? This is the magic that happens when a story touches humanity's collective soul. Steph's appeal had been on air for only 4 hours when the first phone call came. Jennifer Walsh, a nurse at Oakland General Hospital, called with her voice trembling with emotion. "I saw her," she said, barely able to control her excitement. "Margaret is at the Salvation Army shelter on Harrison Street. I recognized her immediately from the video. She's still wearing the coat you showed on TV. Steph felt his heart race, as if he were in the final seconds of a championship game. But this time, the victory he sought was infinitely more important than any trophy. "Thank you," he whispered into the phone, tears already forming in his eyes. "Thank you for helping me find my heroine." 15 minutes later, Steph was parking in front of the shelter, accompanied by Amanda Foster and a small camera crew that had insisted on documenting the reunion. His hands trembled as he walked toward the entrance, carrying with him something he had kept for 27 years. The letter Margaret had given him on the last day of class. It was possible to perceive that this wasn't just a reunion. It was the closing of a circle that had begun decades ago, when a dedicated teacher planted seeds of self-confidence in the heart of an insecure child. Margaret was sitting alone in a corner of the main hall, still wearing Steph's coat, carefully leafing through a worn book. When she raised her eyes and saw Steph walking toward her, her face went through a transformation that no camera could completely capture, from initial recognition to total disbelief, until finally surrendering to the purest emotion. "Steph?" she whispered, as if she were seeing a ghost. "Hi, Teacher Margaret," Steph said, his voice breaking completely. "Sorry it took me so long to recognize you." What happened in the next moments was one of the most touching embraces in human history. Margaret stood up with difficulty, and Steph enveloped her in his arms as if he were embracing not just a person, but all the gratitude he had carried in his heart for a lifetime. "My dear boy," Margaret cried, her tears wetting his shoulder. "My dear, dear boy. Look at the incredible man you've become." "Because of you," Steph replied, holding her as if he would never let her go again. "Everything because of you." How is it possible that an embrace contains decades of unexpressed gratitude? There were two people who had shaped each other's lives in profound ways, finally reunited at the moment when both needed it most. "I brought something for you," Steph said, pulling back slightly and taking the yellowed envelope from his pocket. "The letter you gave me. I never opened it, as you asked, but I think now is the right time." Margaret smiled through her tears. "Let's open it together." With hands trembling with emotion, Steph carefully tore the envelope. Inside, there was a sheet of paper with Margaret's careful handwriting. "Dear Steph, if you're reading this letter, it means you've become the extraordinary man I always knew you would be. Always remember, your value doesn't come from how many baskets you make, but from how many hearts you touch. Small gestures change great lives, and you have the power to change the entire world. With all my love and pride, Teacher Margaret." It was impossible not to feel that those words had been written by a prophet who could see the future. Margaret had predicted not only Steph's success, but also his generous heart and his ability to impact lives. "How did you know?" Steph asked, amazed. "Because I saw your heart," Margaret replied, "and hearts like yours always find a way to shine." What Steph did in the following hours completely redefined the concept of gratitude. He didn't just offer Margaret a house. He bought the property where her old house had been, demolished it, and built a new one, exactly as she had dreamed. He created a trust fund that would guarantee she would never be in need again. But more important than that, he gave her back something she had lost: her dignity and purpose. "Margaret," Steph said, sitting beside her in the shelter, "I want you to go back to teaching." "Steph, dear, I'm 79 years old. And I have a foundation that needs the world's best educator to train other teachers about how to identify and nurture potential in children. Great gestures change great lives, and at that moment, Steph was offering Margaret not just financial security, but the opportunity to multiply her impact forever. The story of the reunion exploded globally, with a force that surprised even Steph. The video of the embrace was viewed more than 100 million times in 48 hours. Newspapers from all continents published the story. People from around the world began sharing their own stories about teachers who had changed their lives. But the real impact went far beyond going viral. Inspired by Steph and Margaret's story, schools around the world created mentor recognition programs where successful former students returned to honor teachers who had made a difference in their lives. The Margaret Sullivan Foundation became global, offering financial support to retired educators in difficulties. 1 year later, Margaret was back in classrooms, not as a regular teacher, but as a mentor to young educators, teaching them about the art of seeing potential where others see only limitations. "Small gestures change great lives," she would say to each new class of teachers. But great hearts change the entire world. Steph, for his part, discovered a new definition of victory. He began visiting schools regularly, not to talk about basketball, but to talk about gratitude and recognition. "Find your Margarets," he would tell students, "and when you find them, don't wait decades to thank them." How many times in life do we witness the birth of a legacy that transcends generations? Steph and Margaret's story proved that recognition is not just a beautiful gesture. It's a human necessity that can transform the lives of both those who recognize and those who are recognized. 3 years later, at the inauguration ceremony of the Margaret Sullivan Teaching Excellence Center, Steph gave a speech that touched hearts around the world. "I thought my greatest victory had been winning NBA championships, but I discovered that my greatest victory was having been lucky enough to be a student of the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. Margaret taught me that true heroes aren't those who make impossible shots. They're those who make the impossible believe in itself." Margaret, now 82 years old and radiant with health and purpose, responded with words that became her mantra. "Steph, my dear, you have always been my greatest pride. Not because you became famous, but because you never forgot where you came from, and never lost the ability to see value in others." It was impossible not to feel that this story had created something eternal, a reminder that every life we touch carries the potential to touch us back in ways we would never imagine. The story of a coat given on a cold night transformed into the most powerful lesson the modern world had received about gratitude, recognition, and the transformative power of honoring those who helped us become who we are. Small gestures change great lives, but when these gestures are born from true gratitude, they have the power to change not just lives, they change the entire world. One grateful heart at a time. And so, a retired teacher and an NBA champion proved that the most perfect circles are those where love planted in the past returns multiplied in the present, creating a future where recognizing and honoring our mentors becomes the most important victory of all.